On September 1st, 1939, the world plunged into its deadliest conflict, World War II, born from the ashes of the First Great War and the rise of totalitarianism. A storm of conquest swept across the globe. Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis powers, sought domination. Europe burned, cities were bombed, and nations fell. Poland, then France. Britain stood alone against the Nazi onslaught. The war soon became global. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the fight. Battles raged from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen plains of Russia. Millions perished, soldiers, civilians, and victims of the Holocaust. But the tide turned. The Allies united for the final push. D-Day in 1944 began the liberation of Europe. In 1945, Hitler's regime fell, and Japan surrendered. The war ended, leaving behind a changed world. It was a story of immense destruction, but also of incredible human courage. On June 22, 1941, the largest invasion in human history began. Without warning, 3 million German soldiers stormed across the Soviet border in Operation Barbarossa. Hitler's plan was simple: a swift blitzkrieg to crush the Soviet Union in a single summer campaign. At first, it seemed unstoppable. German tanks raced eastward, encircling and destroying entire Soviet armies. Army Group North besieged Leningrad, Army Group South conquered Ukraine, and Army Group Center drove toward Moscow. Behind the front, Nazi death squads carried out mass executions. It was a war of annihilation. But the Soviet Union did not break. Factories were moved east, and new armies were raised. Then came the mud, and then the brutal Russian winter. German soldiers froze in their summer uniforms. Their equipment failed. Just outside Moscow, the exhausted German advance finally ground to a halt. Fresh Siberian divisions counterattacked, pushing them back. The blitzkrieg had failed. The war on the Eastern Front would become the bloodiest in history. A brutal struggle that would ultimately seal Germany's fate. Summer 1940. Europe has fallen. Britain stands alone, its army disarmed after Dunkirk. Across the Channel, Hitler prepares to invade, but first he must conquer the skies. This is the story of the Battle of Britain. The German Luftwaffe launches a massive assault targeting airfields and radar stations, aiming to crush the Royal Air Force. Waves of bombers and fighters swarm across the English Channel. The RAF, outnumbered, scrambles to meet them. Young pilots in Spitfires and Hurricanes climb into a sky filled with fire and steel. Britain's secret weapon, radar. This early warning system gives them precious minutes to intercept the raids. Day after day, the battle rages. Airfields are bombed. Planes are destroyed, but the pilots fight on. In a fatal error, Hitler shifts his focus to bombing London. This gives the battered RAF a chance to recover. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe launches its largest attack yet, but it's a disaster. RAF fighters inflict devastating losses, forcing a retreat. The invasion is cancelled. For the first time, the Nazi war machine is stopped. Britain had survived. By summer 1943, the Eastern Front was bleeding. After Stalingrad, Hitler desperately needed a victory. His plan was Operation Citadel, a massive pincer attack at the Kursk salient to encircle and destroy the Red Army. He unleashed his best weapons, the fearsome Tiger and Panther tanks. But Soviet intelligence knew everything. They didn't retreat. They prepared for months. They built a fortress of trenches, minefields, and hidden anti-tank guns. When the German attack began on July 5th, it wasn't a blitzkrieg, it was a meat grinder. Progress was measured in meters, paid for in blood and steel. The climax came at Prokhorovka, where hundreds of tanks clashed at point-blank range in a chaotic, fiery whirlwind. Germany inflicted heavy losses, but their own were irreplaceable. Then the Allies landed in Sicily. Hitler faltered and called off the attack. It was Germany's last great offensive in the East. Kursk wasn't just the largest tank battle in history. It was the turning point. From there, the road for the Red Army led only one way west, towards Berlin. December 7, 1941, at Pearl Harbor, a quiet Sunday morning was shattered. At 7:48 a.m., the sky filled with Japanese aircraft. This was no accident. It was a calculated strike meant to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Torpedoes tore into battleships, and bombs rained down with deadly accuracy. The USS Arizona exploded in a catastrophic blast, entombing over 1,000 of its crew. In less than 2 hours, the harbor was a scene of fire and ruin. Over 2,400 Americans lost their lives. The next day, President Roosevelt declared it a date which will live in infamy, and Congress declared war. The attack was meant to break America's will, but it did the opposite. It awakened a sleeping giant. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor, a nation rose, united and determined, setting the stage for a global conflict that would change the world forever. Thanks for watching. In September 1941, the German army trapped the city of Leningrad, home to 3 million people. Hitler's order was not to capture it, but to wipe it from the face of the earth. For 872 days, the city was cut off. No food, no fuel, no escape. As winter fell, temperatures dropped to extreme lows. Power failed. Water pipes froze. Bread rations were reduced to just a few bites, often mixed with sawdust. People starved, collapsing in the snow-covered streets. Yet, Leningrad refused to break. Factories kept running under constant shelling. Artists and musicians performed as bombs fell, broadcasting their defiance to the enemy lines. A dangerous ice road across Lake Ladoga, the Road of Life, became their only lifeline, bringing in small amounts of food and evacuating the weak. When the siege was finally lifted in 1944, over 1 million civilians had died, mostly from hunger. The city was in ruins, but it had never surrendered. It was a testament to unimaginable human endurance.